Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another edition of Intuitive Angling. Much appreciated you tuning in. And if you're new to the channel, welcome, and please hit that subscribe button. That'd be much appreciated. And today we're going to have a conversation. It's actually, last night I did a podcast with Oliver Nye on his Big Bass Dreams podcast, and we were talking about this a little bit. And I want to talk, and by the way, you can check it out on the recorded podcast we did. If you go to Big Bass Dreams website or YouTube channel, you can check it out there. But anyway, what we want to talk about today is sort of like the life cycle of a bass angler. And I've been an observer of this my whole life, and I want to talk about sort of like what happens as a bass angler starts out and they get to the high point of their fishing success, and when they start getting older and everything. And I'm going to go through that whole process and sort of give you guys my thoughts on what happens to you as a bass angler as you age, from early age up until old age here, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Real quick before we get started here, just wanted to let everybody know we are getting ready to come out with on the Block It Old School jig. I'm going to give you guys, I'm going to create a special signature color, sort of my secret color jig I haven't shared with anybody. So keep an eye out for that on the Baitworks online store. It's going to be the secret color Block It Old School jig I'm going to share with you guys. If you guys are interested, you can go to the Baitworks online store. I'll include a link on the description here, and keep an eye out for that. So it's going to be pretty exciting. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the life cycle of a bass fisherman here. Now, here's sort of what happens in the evolution of a bass angler from my perspective. It's like when somebody first starts getting interested in bass fishing, and it can be anywhere between a little kid, 7 or 8 years old, up until some people are in their 20s, 30s, 40s before they start fishing. But eventually, this is sort of what happens, and I'm going to start assuming that a lot of people fish at a young age, like in their teens and stuff, up until old age. The thing that I found out about what you can expect, and there's been very few exceptions to this that I've seen, it's almost like everybody falls into this category to some extent. What you sort of have is when you first start getting into bass fishing and you start bass fishing, you got this learning curve where you're sort of awkward and you're trying to learn about fish and bass movements and what bass bite, and you're trying to get your casting skills and your boat trolling motor skills down. There's a learning curve that takes place initially on that. But what happens that I found out is if somebody's really interested in fishing and they work to acquire these skills, you've got about this 5-year learning period where you're learning about bass. And then what happens, and say for example this learning curve takes place at 21, and by the time you're 21 you start getting to where you're starting to catch fish and you're starting to be comfortable with learning, and you've got a lot of passion and desire to get better in the sport. The stage that happens after that is you start, let Sage in here guys real quick. You start going through this accelerated process at the point, Sage, come here. You start going through this accelerated process once you start getting the fundamentals down and the basic, concepts of fishing down, and you see an acceleration in your creative abilities and your imagination. Guys, this right here is one of the most important stages in the life cycle of a bass fisherman, is where you take your own creativity and imagination and you apply it to fishing. You start working with techniques that maybe nobody else has thought of. You try different colors that maybe nobody else has thought of. You try different approaches that maybe nobody else has thought about. One of the things that I did back in my 20s is I tried to get my boat into places that nobody else could get their boat into because they'd scratch it up too bad, or they didn't want to cut down limbs to get back into place. That was sort of my deal back in the early 20s. And you start to sort of form your identity as an angler in your 20s. And this is a really important stage in your career, because this is the time that you start seeing some successes from this creativity. A lot of people start doing good. They start winning tournaments. There's been a lot of superstar anglers like Jacob Wheeler winning tournaments at 21 years old, won the Forestwood Cup. And this is due to this imagination creativity that's fresh. It's part of having a young, fresh mind that hasn't been hammered down by the injustices that fishing brings upon you as the years go by. It's something that you haven't experienced enough success or failure as a result of some uncontrolled variables. You're still sort of young. I don't want to sound this derogatory, but you're still sort of young and dumb. You don't know that some things that aren't supposed to work. It's a pretty exciting time to fish. And then what happens as you get into your 30s, guys, the 30s is when this combination of imagination, creativity, and maturity, and everything's firing on all 8 cylinders. And that's why when you're in your 30s, for the most part, particularly from like 35 to 40, you're at the top of your game. This is the peak for almost every bass angler out there. You're in good physical shape. You're in good mental shape. Like I said, you've accumulated years of knowledge, of intellectual knowledge. You can trust your intuitions and your instincts. You still got imagination, creativity. You haven't fished long enough to get locked into certain things where you don't experiment. So the peak for most anglers in performance is 35 to 40 years old. And this success will last into your 40s, into sometimes up into your mid to late 40s. But what happens, and I don't mean this to be in stone and it's like you're destined to fall into this category. I'm saying by far this is what happens in 95% of the situations. I don't know anyone that's transcended it myself. I've never seen it. But once you start getting into your late 40s and around 50, everybody out there starts going through this noticeable decline in performance. It can be slow at first or it can be rapid at first. And it gets gradually a little bit worse as the years go on into your 50s and 60s and 70s. And at first it doesn't make any sense because you think that the more experience that you've accumulated in bass fishing, you should just get better and better and better. And by the time you're 70 years old, you should be unbeatable. It doesn't work like that. Creativity and imagination and ingenuity is more important than experience in the sport. And what happens when you start hitting that 50 year mark, I've seen it in my own fishing, I've seen it in Kevin Van Dam, I've seen it in Rick Clunn, I've seen it in Larry Nixon, everybody out there, Denny Brower, nobody's been immune to it. When you start getting to this point, you start getting set in your ways. You've had so much success in the past doing certain things that it's hard to put that away. When you've won tournaments and you've dominated the sport for decades with a certain skill set, it's hard to put that aside if that's not working. That's the first thing. The second thing is life gets in the way. I mean, you have a family to take care of now. You got responsibilities. You got bills to pay. You got to make sure your kids get through college. You know, you got all this stuff with life coming in at you that is a distraction. Where when you were in your 20s and your 30s, you may have been single or you didn't have a lot of responsibilities. Now you're getting more responsibilities. Physically, you know, the physical part of it is actually the most important part of it, because you can remain super strong and super healthy into your 80s if you take care of yourself. Yeah, everybody's going to lose your vision. I got to wear reading glasses to read anything. That's just part of the process. It's not a big deal there. But the physical part of it, your reflexes may slow down a little bit, but I don't see that as the big thing. More than anything else, what happens is you get into your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you simply get locked into what you're doing too much. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's just part of the process of life. And one of the things that I think that will allow you to enjoy fishing more as you get older is don't sweat it. I mean, if you don't feel like you're at the top of your game like you were in the past, just realize that's just part of life, man. That's just part of the cycle of life. Life is fleeting, guys. Life is temporary. Life is short, man. And you have got to accept that everybody has their day in the sun. Everybody has certain phases of their life, and you need to make the most out of that. It doesn't make any difference what age you are. You have to embrace that particular age, and you have to experience it for the fullest and realize that's just part of it. And if you're fortunate enough to live to be old, consider yourself fortunate, because a lot of people haven't had that opportunity. So Anyway, like I said, just know that as a bass fisherman, you're going to go through cycles. You're going to have periods where you're top of the game. You may struggle at first if you're young, and then eventually your successes, particularly if you're a competitive angler, are going to start going downhill, and that's okay. Don't fight it. That's just the way it is, man. It's okay. It's okay to do that. Maybe you can shift more into trying to teach people, young people, about fishing, and then that becomes even more rewarding than the fishing itself that you had in the past. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Hope it stimulated a few thoughts in everybody, and thanks for tuning in again, and we'll see y'all later.